The St. Augustine Hospital had always been a place of healing, or so I believed. With its grand facade and high ceilings, it seemed more like a historical landmark than a medical facility. When I took the job as a night shift nurse, I was thrilled to be working in such a prestigious institution. But as I would soon learn, St. Augustine had secrets that went far beyond its polished exterior. It started with small, inexplicable occurrences. The creaking of gurneys in the dead of night, whispers that seemed to drift through the hallways, and a persistent cold draft that no amount of adjusting the ventilation could seem to explain. I was new to the night shift, and while the eerie atmosphere unsettled me, I tried to brush it off as a combination of fatigue and overactive imagination. My duties were straightforward enough: checking on patients, administering medications, and ensuring everything ran smoothly. But as the weeks went by, the incidents grew more disturbing. I would hear footsteps echoing through the empty halls when no one else was around, and occasionally, the lights in the corridors would flicker unpredictably. The most unsettling part was the feeling of being watched, a sensation that gnawed at me, especially when I was alone in the dimly lit hallways. The real terror began when I was assigned to Ward 13. It was an older part of the hospital, isolated from the rest of the facility and rarely used. The few times I had walked past it during the day, it had always seemed abandoned. The ward was infamous among the staff for being the site of inexplicable occurrences, but the tales were always dismissed as urban legends. My first night in Ward 13 was eerily quiet. The hallways were lined with empty rooms, and the air was thick with dust and the faint, musty smell of decay. As I conducted my rounds, I noticed something odd. Several of the rooms had been recently cleaned and stocked with medical supplies, despite the fact that the ward had been closed for years. The discrepancy left me with an unsettling feeling, but I attributed it to oversight or perhaps a lapse in hospital management. That night, as I went about my tasks, I couldn't shake the sense that something was terribly wrong. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the building settling. As the hours ticked by, I found myself increasingly uneasy, my nerves on edge. I decided to investigate the ward's history further, hoping to uncover the source of the eerie atmosphere. The more I dug into Ward 13's past, the more unsettling the revelations became. I discovered that it had once been a state-of-the-art psychiatric ward, notorious for its experimental treatments. In the 1950s, it had been shut down abruptly after a series of unexplained patient deaths and accusations of unethical practices. The records were sparse and heavily redacted, but the whispers of patients who had suffered and died in that ward lingered in the hospital's history. One night, while poring over old records in the dimly lit office adjacent to Ward 13, I heard a faint, plaintive cry coming from within the ward. The sound was so faint that I almost convinced myself it was a figment of my imagination. But as the cries grew louder, I couldn't ignore them any longer. With a mixture of trepidation and determination, I ventured into Ward 13. The ward was dark, lit only by the occasional flicker of malfunctioning fluorescent lights. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, and the shadows danced menacingly on the walls. I followed the cries to a particular room, its door slightly ajar. Inside, I found a single bed in the center of the room, its sheets meticulously arranged, and the air was inexplicably cold. The cries intensified as I approached the bed, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I saw no one, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. The room's atmosphere grew more oppressive, and I could see my breath fogging in the air. As I turned to leave, I noticed something unsettling, a faint, handwritten note pinned to the wall beside the bed. The note was scrawled in a shaky hand and read, "They never leave. We are trapped. Help us." The words were smeared as if written in haste or fear, and the message sent a shiver through me. I could feel the weight of despair and desperation in those few words. Determined to uncover the truth, I continued my investigation. The cries and whispers grew more intense as the nights wore on, and the feeling of being watched never left me. I started to experience vivid, disturbing dreams where I was trapped in the ward, unable to escape as shadowy figures reached out for me. The dreams left me feeling exhausted and on edge. One night, while conducting my rounds, I noticed a figure standing at the end of the hallway, its form obscured by the darkness. It was humanoid but distorted, with hollow eyes and a twisted smile that sent waves of dread through me. I froze, unable to move as the figure approached. It seemed to glide rather than walk, and its presence was suffused with an aura of malevolence. As the figure drew closer, it became clear that it was not just a shadow but a reflection of the ward's darkest past. The figure's face was an amalgamation of anguish and sorrow, a tortured echo of the patients who had suffered there. It reached out a skeletal hand, and I felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of despair and suffocation. I fled from Ward 13, my heart pounding, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The experience had left me shaken and terrified. I could no longer ignore the connection between the ward and the strange occurrences that had plagued me since I started the night shift. The following day, I approached the hospital administration with my findings and concerns. To my surprise, they were dismissive and evasive. They claimed that Ward 13 was being renovated and assured me that everything was under control. They seemed unusually eager to downplay my concerns, and their reluctance to investigate further only fueled my apprehension. That night, I resolved to confront whatever was haunting Ward 13 once and for all. Armed with a flashlight, a camera, and a sense of grim determination, I returned to the ward. The atmosphere was even more oppressive than before, and the cries and whispers seemed to follow me as I moved through the darkened halls. As I reached the room with the note, I felt an icy hand grasp my shoulder. I spun around, but there was no one there. The room was filled with an otherworldly presence, and I could see ghostly figures moving in the shadows, their faces etched with pain and sorrow. In the center of the room, the figure from my earlier encounter stood once more, its form clearer and more defined. It seemed to be trying to communicate something, its gestures frantic and desperate. I focused on its movements, trying to decipher its message. It was as if the figure was reliving its final moments, trapped in a cycle of anguish. Driven by a mix of fear and compassion, I reached out towards the figure, whispering words of comfort and apology. The figure's expression softened, and the room's oppressive atmosphere seemed to lift slightly. The shadows that had clung to the walls began to recede, and the cries grew quieter. In the days that followed, Ward 13 was finally closed for good. The administration, under increasing pressure from staff and patients alike, decided to seal it off and conduct a thorough investigation into its dark past. The ghostly occurrences ceased, and the unsettling atmosphere of the hospital seemed to dissipate. Though I had played a small role in unraveling the mysteries of Ward 13, the experience left me profoundly changed. The echoes of the past lingered in my mind, a reminder of the suffering that had once echoed through those halls. The hospital continued its work, but the shadows of Ward 13 remained a silent testament to the darkness that can dwell within even the most venerable institutions. When I first started working at Eastgate Hospital, I was excited to be part of a facility known for its cutting-edge treatments and compassionate care. The hospital was a sprawling complex, with modern buildings and state-of-the-art equipment. But there was one area that always seemed off, a section of the hospital that remained sealed off and rarely mentioned, the forgotten floor. Rumors about the forgotten floor had circulated among the staff for years. According to hospital lore, it had been shut down after a series of unexplained incidents and mysterious patient disappearances in the 1970s. The floor was officially closed off, and its existence was rarely acknowledged by the administration. To most staff, it was an enigma, an unsettling part of the hospital's past that was best left undisturbed. My first encounter with the forgotten floor came by accident. I had been working a late shift, and a sudden power outage had plunged the hospital into darkness. As I navigated the dimly lit corridors with a flashlight, I noticed a door that had previously been locked was now slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pushed it open, revealing a staircase leading down to the forgotten floor. I hesitated at the threshold, the cold air seeping through the door making me shiver. The forgotten floor had always been described as a labyrinth of outdated and dilapidated rooms. My flashlight flickered as I descended the stairs, the silence around me deepening with each step. The air grew colder, and an unsettling sense of foreboding settled over me. When I reached the bottom, I found myself in a long, narrow corridor. The walls were lined with peeling paint and faded signs, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the building. I moved cautiously, shining my flashlight ahead, revealing abandoned rooms filled with forgotten medical equipment and old, dusty beds. As I explored, I noticed that the rooms seemed to be arranged in a disorienting pattern. It was as if the floor had been designed to confuse and disorient anyone who ventured into it. I also noticed that many of the rooms had been hastily vacated, with personal items left behind, an old photograph, a half-empty medicine bottle, a crumpled chart. It was as if the staff had left in a hurry, leaving behind a ghostly record of their last moments on the floor. The deeper I went, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. The walls seemed to close in around me, and I began to hear faint, indistinguishable whispers that seemed to echo through the corridors. The whispers grew louder, and I could make out words like help and lost. I tried to dismiss them as figments of my imagination, but the feeling of being watched was palpable. I finally reached a large room at the end of the corridor. It was different from the others, larger, with a heavy door that seemed more secure. The door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open cautiously. Inside, I found a room that had once been a treatment area, with old, rusted medical equipment and dusty examination tables. But what caught my attention was a large, cracked mirror hanging on the wall. The mirror was covered in grime, and I could barely see my reflection. As I approached it, I noticed something strange. The reflection in the mirror didn't match the room. It showed a different layout, as if the mirror was reflecting an alternate version of the floor. The reflection was blurred, distorted, and filled with shadowy figures moving in the background. Suddenly, the whispers grew louder, and I felt a cold breeze brush past me. The temperature in the room dropped significantly, and I could see my breath in the air. The shadows in the mirror began to take shape, coalescing into vague, ghostly forms that seemed to reach out toward me. The air was filled with an oppressive sense of dread. I turned away from the mirror, trying to calm my racing heart. The whispers became more insistent, and I felt a presence behind me. I spun around to find nothing there, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to writhe and move, as if alive. In a panic, I fled from the room, retracing my steps through the labyrinthine corridors. The whispers followed me, growing louder and more urgent. I felt as if I were being pursued by something unseen, and the sense of disorientation grew with every turn I took. The hospital's layout seemed to change around me, with familiar corridors becoming twisted and unfamiliar. Finally, I stumbled back into the main part of the hospital, the door to the forgotten floor slamming shut behind me. I was gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. The power had been restored, and the lights flickered back to life. The hospital was quiet once more, but the sense of unease lingered. The next day, I reported my experience to the administration. They were dismissive, brushing off my concerns with vague explanations about outdated safety protocols and the need for confidentiality. They insisted that the forgotten floor was a relic of the past and that there was nothing to worry about. Despite their assurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was hidden on that floor. I began to notice other staff members who seemed uneasy or reluctant to talk about the forgotten floor. It was as if the entire hospital was harboring a collective secret. As time passed, the forgotten floor remained locked and sealed, and the whispers faded into the background. But the experience had left me profoundly shaken. I continued my work at Eastgate Hospital, but the shadow of the forgotten floor lingered in my mind. The sense of dread and the ghostly whispers were a constant reminder of the secrets that lay hidden beneath the hospital's polished facade. The forgotten floor remained a chilling enigma, a silent testament to the darkness that can be concealed within even the most prestigious institutions. And though it was sealed away, the echoes of that haunted place would forever remain in my memory, a reminder of the horrors that can lurk in the shadows of our most trusted places. I had always been drawn to the medical field, finding solace in the order and predictability of hospitals. When I landed a job at St. Mark's Hospital, renowned for its state-of-the-art facilities and compassionate care, I thought my career was on the right track. Little did I know that the seemingly perfect institution harbored a dark secret that would shatter my sense of safety and reality. St. Mark's was a sprawling complex, modern and sleek, with every corner designed to provide comfort and efficiency. But there was one section of the hospital that seemed oddly neglected, Ward 9. It was a small, isolated wing of the hospital that had been closed off for years due to structural issues. Or so I was told. On my first night shift, I was assigned to cover for a colleague who was out sick. As part of my duties, I had to check the equipment in every ward, including the rarely used Ward 9. It was said that the ward was scheduled for renovation, but the work had been delayed. I found myself curious about this mysterious part of the hospital, and as I approached the ward, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. The hallway leading to Ward 9 was dimly lit and eerily quiet. The door to the ward was heavy and rusty, and as I pushed it open, a creaking sound echoed through the corridor. The air inside was thick with dust and the faint smell of mildew. The ward was a time capsule from a bygone era, with outdated medical equipment and faded wallpaper that seemed to sag from the walls. I started my rounds, methodically checking the equipment and noting any issues. Everything seemed to be in disarray, machines left unplugged, files scattered on the floor. As I moved through the ward, I noticed something strange. The beds in the rooms were meticulously made, as if someone had prepared them for patients who would never arrive. It was then that I heard the first sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from one of the rooms. I hesitated, my flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. The tapping grew louder and more insistent, like someone tapping on a metal surface. I cautiously approached the source of the noise, my heart pounding with every step. When I opened the door to the room, I found it empty. The tapping had ceased, and the room was silent once more. I scanned the room, noting the medical equipment and the neatly arranged bed. The sense of unease grew stronger, but I chalked it up to the eerie atmosphere of the abandoned ward. As the night wore on, I continued my inspections, but the feeling of being watched never left me. I began to see fleeting shadows moving in the corners of my vision, and the temperature in the ward seemed to drop inexplicably. The whispers of my colleagues about the ward being haunted came back to me, and I struggled to dismiss them as mere superstition. By the time my shift was ending, I was exhausted and eager to leave Ward 9 behind. As I made my way back to the exit, I noticed something unsettling. The door to the ward was now firmly shut, as if someone had sealed it from the outside. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as I realized that I was trapped. The lights flickered, casting erratic shadows across the hallway. The tapping noise returned, now accompanied by low, mournful wails that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. I banged on the door, shouting for help, but the sounds of my cries were swallowed by the oppressive silence. Desperate, I turned to the equipment in the ward, hoping to find a way to signal for help. As I fiddled with the intercom system, I heard a voice, soft, distant, and tinged with sorrow. It spoke in a language I didn't understand, but the tone was unmistakably pleading. The voice seemed to come from all directions, filling the air with an overwhelming sense of despair. In a fit of panic, I grabbed my flashlight and began searching the ward for an alternate exit. The whispers grew louder, and I saw shadowy figures moving just beyond the reach of my light. The figures were indistinct but seemed to follow me, their presence a constant reminder of the ward's malevolent energy. Finally, I stumbled upon a small door at the back of the ward, partially hidden behind a stack of old medical supplies. The door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. I had no other choice but to descend, hoping it would lead me to safety. The staircase seemed to go on forever, winding downward into the depths of the hospital. The air grew colder, and the whispers became a cacophony of anguish. The walls of the staircase were lined with old, peeling paint and grimy tiles, and the feeling of dread intensified with every step. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a dimly lit room, filled with old files and medical records. The room was cluttered with dust-covered furniture and broken equipment. In the center of the room stood an old, rusted bed, its metal frame twisted and warped. The air was thick with the smell of decay. As I approached the bed, I noticed a figure lying on it, a patient, pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes staring up at the ceiling. The figure seemed to be trapped in a state of eternal suffering, its eyes pleading for release. The sight was both haunting and heartbreaking. I backed away from the bed, my mind racing. The whispers grew louder, converging into a single, coherent voice that spoke in a tone of bitter resignation. "Help us," the voice said. "We were forgotten." I turned to leave, but the shadows in the room seemed to close in around me, blocking my path. The figures began to take shape, their forms twisted and distorted by their suffering. They reached out with ghostly hands, their expressions a mix of fear and anger. In a final, desperate effort, I grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher and swung it at the shadows, creating a burst of light and sound. The figures recoiled, and the oppressive atmosphere began to lift. I seized the opportunity to flee, racing back up the stairs and through the labyrinthine corridors of Ward 9. When I finally emerged into the main part of the hospital, the door to Ward 9 was once again open. The lights were bright, and the whispers had ceased. I collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. The next day, I reported the incident to the administration. They were dismissive, claiming that Ward 9 had been checked and found to be safe. They assured me that there were no issues with the ward and that it was scheduled for renovation as planned. I was left feeling as if my experience had been brushed aside and my sanity questioned. Though Ward 9 was eventually renovated and reopened, I could never forget the horrors I had witnessed. The whispers and shadows of the forgotten ward remained etched in my memory, a chilling reminder of the suffering that can lurk within the darkest corners of our world. The vanishing ward had revealed a glimpse of a hidden reality, one that would forever haunt my nights and dreams. When I took a job as a night shift nurse at Grayson Medical Center, I expected the usual rigors of hospital life, the long hours, the stress of patient care, and the occasional chaos of emergencies. Grayson Medical Center was a prestigious hospital with a reputation for excellence, but beneath its polished surface lay a hidden and terrifying truth that would test my sanity. The hospital was divided into various wings, each specializing in different aspects of care. My assigned area was the Nightingale Wing, a state-of-the-art facility designed to handle critical cases. It was a bustling place during the day, but at night, it took on an eerie stillness that made even the most routine tasks seem unsettling. It was during my first night shift that I learned about the Phantom's Ward. The ward was a long-abandoned section of the hospital, rumored to be haunted by the spirits of patients who had died under mysterious circumstances. Most staff avoided it entirely, dismissing it as a relic of the past. But as a new nurse eager to prove myself, I found the stories intriguing rather than frightening. One evening, a power outage plunged the hospital into darkness. The backup generators kicked in, but the lights in certain sections, including the Phantom's Ward, remained out. I was tasked with checking the electrical panels in that area, a duty I approached with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. The corridor leading to the Phantom's Ward was dimly lit by the emergency lights, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. The air was colder than the rest of the hospital, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of the generators. The door to the ward was heavy and old, creaking ominously as I pushed it open. The ward was unlike any other part of the hospital I had seen. It was a ghostly echo of its former self, with faded wallpaper, broken windows, and dust-covered furniture. The rooms were filled with old medical equipment and abandoned patient beds, each one left as if the occupants had simply vanished. The atmosphere was thick with an unsettling stillness, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I inspected the electrical panel, I heard a noise, a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from one of the rooms. I froze, straining to hear. The tapping was intermittent, like someone knocking on a door or a hollow surface. I decided to investigate, my flashlight casting eerie beams of light through the darkness. The tapping led me to a room at the end of the corridor. The door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open with a sense of foreboding. Inside, I found an old examination room with a single bed and a rusted metal tray. The tapping had stopped, and the room was eerily quiet. I was about to turn away when I noticed something unsettling. The bed's sheets were perfectly arranged, but there was a faint, shadowy figure lying beneath them. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding. The figure was indistinct, a swirling mass of darkness that seemed to shift and writhe. I could barely make out a face, pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes staring directly at me. I stepped back in horror, stumbling into the doorway. The figure began to move, its form elongating and distorting as it rose from the bed. I could hear the whispers now, faint, mournful voices that seemed to come from all directions. The figure's face was a mask of anguish, its eyes filled with a sorrow that seemed to reach into my very soul. Desperate to escape, I turned and fled from the room. The whispers grew louder, and the shadows in the corridor seemed to close in around me. I could hear footsteps echoing behind me, but when I looked back, there was no one there. The oppressive darkness made it difficult to see, and the emergency lights flickered erratically. As I raced through the ward, I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder. I spun around, but the corridor was empty. The feeling of being pursued was overwhelming, and I could sense the presence of something malevolent following me. The whispers turned into anguished cries, and the temperature in the ward dropped dramatically. Finally, I reached the exit door, pushing it open and stumbling into the main part of the hospital. The emergency lights flickered back to life, and the oppressive atmosphere of the Phantom's ward receded. I collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath, my heart racing. The next day, I reported the incident to my supervisor. They listened with a mixture of concern and skepticism, assuring me that the Phantom's ward was off-limits due to safety concerns and that my experience was likely a result of stress or fatigue. They dismissed my account of the supernatural occurrences as a vivid hallucination. Despite their reassurances, the experience had left me deeply unsettled. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been trapped in that ward, something that was desperate for release. The whispers and the anguished figure haunted my dreams, and the sense of dread lingered even as I continued my duties in the Nightingale wing. In the weeks that followed, I avoided the Phantom's ward whenever possible, and the stories of the haunted ward became a topic of hushed conversation among the staff. The ward remained sealed off, and no one ventured near it. The hospital continued its work, but the eerie presence of the Phantom's ward was a constant reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most modern institutions. The Phantom's ward remained a chilling enigma, a place where the boundaries between reality and the supernatural blurred. It was a stark reminder that sometimes, the true horrors are not the ones we can see but the ones that lurk in the shadows of our deepest fears.